G'day everyone. Thanks for joining me today again. I've got with me another passionate and very experienced guest. He's co-founded and a member of many organisations throughout Australia, and I heard him speak a couple of weeks ago, and it really hit a few chords for me. So I've got Rod Evans here, the founder and principal of Ideas to Results. He's also an esteemed lecturer, and he's also currently completing his PhD as well. So some of you who have completed an MBA or at Curtin, you might have come across him. I believe he teaches strategy, and he's definitely worth his weight in gold. So welcome, Rod.
Hi, Harvey. How are you?
Thanks for joining me today. And for our podcasters, maybe we just start a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you're up to these days.
Well, my background, I didn't follow a traditional career path. I went to university and got a Bachelor of Economics, and eventually found myself doing economic research in Canberra for the Australian government. And I was headhunted out of that, interesting enough to move into the area of stockbroking and commodity analysis. And as a result of that, I then ended up, at the age of 28, I was managing director of a venture capital company, so I was quite young, publicly listed company. And my career just kept on changing. I ended up by taking 5 years off to pursue an ambition of becoming a world champion cyclist, and never quite became a world champion cyclist, but I did set 6 world records in cycling, the last one of which was broken only last year. And then gradually I moved more and more into strategy, and I headed up the Western Australian government program to attract investment into Western Australia, which was highly successful in the late 90s, and then moved over to Alinta, and I was involved in strategy there and involved with some of the largest corporate transactions in Australia at the time, all in the billions of dollars range. And what was happening behind the scenes all the time was that people used to ring me up and ask me if I'd have coffee with them to discuss an idea. And it occurred to me that I'd made a lot of people a lot of money helping them develop up ideas. And I actually paid for the coffee myself. And so I eventually left the corporate world, or left the strategy world, heading strategy and turnarounds and the like, and I set up my own business, which is helping people come up with ideas. And as a result of that, that's led me to lecturing, which you've just talked about. I'm writing a book. I'm doing my PhD on what happens inside the boardrooms of companies that come up with breakthrough ideas. And I chair 2 companies, and just this morning I've been invited to chair another public company. So, yeah, that's my background.
Awesome, very robust, and I think something that the young people listening can probably relate to is our careers and our career trajectories. I think are going to be very different, and it's going to have a lot of roller coaster a bit of a roller coaster trajectory and different twists and turns. So it's interesting to see that different generations have also experienced that, and in terms of navigating, from one career path to another. How do you go from venture capital to strategy to now boardrooms and your own business?
I think that we're seeing a generational change. So if you'd been sitting down with me 15 years ago and you'd been a man in your 60s, you'd be saying, Rod, there's a basic mistake you're making. You haven't picked a career and stuck with it.
Yeah.
And that was the traditional way. You left university or left school, you went into a firm and you stayed with that firm for the rest of your life. And if you moved around, it was seen as a sign of weakness. I guess I was a bit cutting edge. I moved around a lot. And what caused me to move around is that I've got a fundamental belief that we need to enjoy life. Like, we need to have a little bit of fun with life. We need to entertain our passions. And so every move I made was because I was moving to an area that I felt I passionately enjoyed.
Okay.
And that was what was happening. So, and sometimes it was incredibly radical. Like, here I am managing director of a public company at the age of 28, 29, and you'd say, stick with it, Rod, because you're now on a very, very good path. And I threw it all in and went off riding a push bike for 5 years. And But it was because I had a passion, and you could say, well, okay, Rod, you've now wasted 5 years of your life. But in that 5 years, I learned a lot about failure, and I learned a lot about success. And the fact that it took me 5 years to go from having a goal of being a world record holder to eventually not only breaking one world record, but 6 world records, I learned a lot along that journey, and that's helped me later on in life. So I feel as if the world's changed, and we need to start thinking ourselves as skilling up in a multiple number of areas. And in fact, you just referenced the fact that I'm doing some research, and my research is in the world of creativity and what allows us to come up with good ideas. And there's a few aspects of that what we call antecedents to creativity, and one of them's knowledge, one of them's diversity, and one's networks. And if you think about somebody adding value into their own lives or to an organisation that they're involved in, if they've got that expansive knowledge, expansive networks, and diversity of experiences, they're going to add a lot more value. And so I'm thinking now that we've got to change our thinking about what we do in our careers and actually be building those 3 foundations, because ultimately, as you alluded to earlier, the world's changing. A lot of things have been automated. In fact, you're responsible for some of it in your career. The world's changing, and those people that are subject to automation, the thing that they've got that automation still can't duplicate, and that's creativity. And creativity comes from having this diversity. So I'm a big advocate of let's change the thinking about what makes a good career, and perhaps I accidentally did follow the right career.
It's interesting you say that the point on creativity. At my work, we watched a video recently where some of the the leaders, they all went to Sydney and they had a keynote conference with I think it was Sir Bob Geldof, and it was Julie Bishop and a few other people. And one of the things that Sir Bob Geldof mentioned in his keys to success for business was a sense of creativity, but also a sense of magic, that X factor. It's something that is within us, I suppose, and it probably stems from being passionate about what you do, right?
Now, I think there's a couple of elements that you're touching on, and I haven't heard Sir Bob Geldof speak, but I'd imagine what he would be saying. And
with a few more expletives.
Yes, yeah. But I'm a big believer in the idea of passion being the centre or the core in anything that we do, because life's going to throw us a lot of curveballs as we go along pursuing a goal. So we've got to have passion. But it's quite interesting, this idea of where ideas come from, because basically an idea, and we're now understanding this through the research we're doing, is really just the collision of 2 other you Yes. And these ideas just hit each other, and then suddenly you've got a really good new idea. And so my feeling is that if you pursue passion and you become very passionate about something, and you allow yourself to learn about all the different ideas, and you just allow them to come together and collide, which Bob Geldof, he might call that's the magic. And perhaps that would be my explanation of what he's talking about with magic. Magic's just allowing 2 ideas to collide in a moment of passion.
That's well said. I agree. That's interesting. So the other part of your journey, as well as being creative and setting goals, is the reflective part, the learning from your failures. Yeah. Maybe I'm jumping ahead of our usual schedule, but what are some of the failures that you experienced, and what would you tell your younger self?
Well, I guess the problem you have when you're having failures is you think it's a failure and you're pretty down on yourself because of it. Probably, if I can just look, I've had many moments of failure during my life, but the one that we've just referenced earlier was my cycling. So what happened with me in cycling is that at the age of 14, I read a book by a famous Australian cyclist called My World on Wheels by Russell Mockridge, and I sort of finished that book and said, I want to be a cyclist. And I ended up by being a relatively successful young cyclist and winning races. Then I got glandular fever, and then my career was finished, and I had glandular fever for nearly 8 years. So, and then I tried to come back and get in the Olympic team, and I missed the boat. They just got so much better, and I was not quite as good as I used to be. So again, it was another moment of failure. And then finally I discovered ultramarathon cycling, and I set the world or the Guinness Book of Records around Australian cycling record. And so now I was on the path of potential success again, and then I broke my leg, and then I had 5 operations and 2 years in and out of hospital. And then I came back and I attempted to break the world 24-hour record, and 3 days beforehand I got the flu. It's just these moments of failure. But what happens is, as I look back on all these moments of failure, is I was learning lessons all the time. And probably if I was talking to my younger self, I'd be saying, look, just take it easy, right? Just relax about this, because you're having a moment of failure, but as long as you reflect on this moment of failure, you will learn something from that. And in fact, what happened was, a couple of years after I broke my leg, it just clicked. I actually worked out the strategic plan of how to break world records in cycling, and it just all came together. And I put that plan down in writing, and followed it for the next 18 months, and then broke 6 world records.
Wow. Okay. That's really interesting, especially in terms of planning. And I know I heard you speak earlier, you were talking about the importance of strategy and planning, putting it on a piece of paper. So we might talk a little bit about that in terms of how important is planning for every business, for every individual young professional, and what are the sort of fundamentals that we should consider?
Well, in terms of the importance, we can go to the data to actually understand the importance. So if we look at like the Australian Institute of, not the Australian Institute of Company Records, but ASIC, they put out a report. It would have been in about 2012, and it was looking at insolvency in businesses in the previous 12-month period. And they noted that about 44% of these insolvency cases were due to poor strategic management. So here we have nearly half of company failures that clearly identified to do with poor strategic planning. So it's not only that report, but a lot of the research now is emphasising this importance of strategic planning. And I guess where my interest lies is, first of all, how can we change the strategic planning process for businesses so they don't fail? And there's a lot of research that we've now done, or not myself, but others, and I've been able to pull it together so that we can now actually help companies to be a lot better at strategic planning. But what's really intrigued me is, if this is so important for companies, why aren't we doing it ourselves? And so what I did was in the unit, I teach the final unit of the MBA at Curtin University, I asked the students, how many of you have a personal strategic plan? And the normal response out of a class of about 40 students is about 3 of them might have a strategic plan. I've never tested them about, well, show it to me. So perhaps some of them have got it just in their head. But it shows you how few of us have strategic plans. And why I'm passionate about this subject is because I feel in life we've got 2 choices we can make. We can either wait for the future to come to us, so we just accept whatever comes to us, or we can actually plan and try and influence where we go to. Strategic planning is about the second scenario, where we actually try and change probabilities of certain things happening in our lives. And I think the majority of us wait for the future to come to us. Like suddenly we found ourselves in a job, we're really busy, our day's just taken up with our job, we're trying to do something with our friends or family of an evening and the weekends, and life just quickly goes past. We're not actually planning for things. And that's what happened with me with my records, is when I suddenly dawned on me that I could build a strategic plan to break world records, it happened. It actually happened.
And did you start off with a bigger goal and break it down into chunks, into steps that you knew that you had to take to then meet those milestones, reach certain times or reach certain amounts of levels of fitness before you could even push for that? Or?
It's a really interesting question you're asking, because I actually think what happens in our lives is that we've got a lot of sub-goals behind the scenes that we want to satisfy. So some of them are to do with family, our financial position, our happiness. They're all those sub-goals, and then we have a central goal. So for me, if we just talk about my records, my central goal became to break world records. Now, you're then asking, I'm assuming you're asking is, like, then how do you frame that goal? And what I'm finding in my experience working with lots of other people is that this acronym SMART just works brilliantly. So, and the SMART acronym for goal setting is basically, the more specific the goal is, the better. The more measurable the goal is, the better. The more agreed upon the goal is, the better. The more realistic the goal is, the better. And the more defined the time frame is, the better. And so I find that when I sit down with people, if they're able to describe their goal in that SMART format, I find that they have a high probability of success. If they're a bit wishy-washy, less probability. So for me, even my most recent goal, which is to be certainly an Australian leader in creative thought and unconventional thinking, I'm able to describe it in a smart way, and I feel that that's much more powerful.
Thanks for listening to the PerthYP Podcast. You can find out more about our upcoming events via LinkedIn at Perth Young Professionals or at our new website, perthyp.com.au. Until next time, keep connecting and keep growing.